I paid off my mother's house without telling anyone. $212,000. I've been moving money quietly for 4 years, a little at a time, the way you fill a jar with loose change until one day it's too heavy to lift. My mother didn't know. My older brother didn't know. Nobody knew except my mortgage broker and the escrow company and me. Her name is Linda. She turned 67 in March, and she has the kind of hands that tell you everything about a person. Knuckles slightly swollen from 30 years of hotel housekeeping, nails always clean, always short. She raised me and my brother Owen alone, after my father walked out when I was 9 and Owen was 14. She never said a word against him. Not once. She just got up every morning at 5 and went to work and made sure we had lunch money and clean clothes, and she never once made us feel like a burden even when I knew we were. I'm 31. I do forensic accounting for a mid-size firm in Cincinnati. I find money people are trying to hide, which means I also know exactly how to document everything that's mine. I didn't come to that work by accident. The house is a 3-bedroom ranch in Dayton, Ohio. My mother bought it in 1998 with a down payment she'd saved over 6 years. It's not a big house. The kitchen has linoleum floors from 1994, and the bathroom tiles are a shade of pink that hasn't been in style since before I was born. But there's a magnolia tree in the front yard that blooms every April, and my mother has tended it for 25 years like it's a member of the family. When I was little, she used to let me watch her prune it. She'd explain each cut like it mattered. "This branch is crossing the other one," she'd say. "They'll fight each other for light if we let them. We don't want that." My mother had 11 years left on her mortgage when I started paying it down. She was working 3 days a week at the hotel. They'd cut her to part-time during COVID and never brought her back full-time, and she was picking up alterations work from a dry cleaner 2 nights a week just to make the payment. I knew this because she mentioned it once and then never mentioned it again, which is how she handles things she considers her own problem. I decided it wasn't only her problem. I didn't tell her because I knew she would refuse. She would say it was too much, that I needed that money for my own life, that she was fine. She says she's fine the way some people say the water is fine, right before you realize they mean it's cold enough to take your breath away. So I didn't ask. I just did it. I structured the payments to come from a separate account I'd set up specifically for this purpose. I coordinated with her mortgage servicer. I got the title company involved 8 months before the final payoff so the paperwork would be clean. And on the morning of her 67th birthday, when I drove down from Cincinnati with a box of her favorite lemon cake from the bakery on 5th Street, I also brought a manila envelope with the deed, stamped paid in full, and a letter from the title company confirming that Linda Shaw was the sole and unencumbered owner of the property at 42012 Birchwood Lane, Dayton, Ohio. She read it 3 times. She held it like it might dissolve. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and put her face in her hands and didn't say anything for almost 2 minutes. "Mom," I said. She looked up. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying, not quite. She was doing the thing she does where she holds emotion just behind her face like water behind a dam. "You shouldn't have done this," she said. "I know," I said. "But I did." She looked at the deed again. Then she got up and hugged me the way she used to when I was small. Both arms completely around me, her chin at the top of my head. We stood there in the pink-tiled kitchen for a long time. I drove back to Cincinnati that evening feeling something I didn't have a word for. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter. Like I'd finished a sentence I'd been writing for years. My brother Owen found out 6 weeks later. I don't know exactly how it happened. My mother mentioned it to one of her friends from church, and the friend mentioned it to someone else, and eventually a version of the story reached Owen's wife, Brenda, who has a talent for extracting information from social networks, and an equal talent for deciding what to do with it. Owen called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was in the middle of reviewing a flagged transaction set for a client. I let it go to voicemail. His message was brief, and the tone was one I recognized. The careful neutrality he uses when he's angry about something but doesn't want to seem angry yet. "Hey, call me back when you get a chance. It's about Mom's house." I called him back that evening. He said he'd heard I had done something with the mortgage. He said he wished I'd talked to him first. He said it was a family decision, and he should have been included. I asked him what exactly he would have contributed to the decision. He said that wasn't the point. I said I thought it kind of was the point. The conversation ended without resolution, which is how most of my conversations with Owen end. I didn't hear from Brenda directly. I didn't expect to. Brenda doesn't contact me when she has something to say. She has it said through Owen, or she creates the conditions for a conversation that serves her purposes without her fingerprints on it. I've been watching her do this for 9 years, since Owen married her, and I've never once seen her wrong-footed in a social situation. She is very good at what she does. What she did was suggest a family dinner. My mother called me 2 weeks after the Owen conversation and said that Owen had been thinking it would be nice for everyone to get together, that it had been a while, that maybe I could come down to Dayton on a Sunday. Her voice had the slightly careful quality it gets when she's relaying a message she didn't entirely originate. I said of course. I said I'd love to see her. I drove down on a Sunday in early October. The magnolia tree had already dropped its leaves. My mother had made her pot roast and there was a pie cooling on the counter, and for the first 20 minutes it felt like any other family Sunday. Owen talked about his job at the logistics company. His daughter, my niece, showed me a drawing she'd made at school. Brenda smiled and refilled glasses and asked questions that seemed like interest and might have been inventory. Then Owen's friend showed up. I want to be precise about this because the sequence matters. We were clearing dishes when the doorbell rang. My mother looked surprised, which told me she wasn't expecting anyone. Owen said, "Oh, that's probably Travis. I told him to stop by. I hope that's okay." Travis turned out to be a man in his early 50s with a firm handshake and a polo shirt with a small embroidered logo I recognized as a real estate brokerage. He was carrying a leather folio. He sat down at the dining room table with the folio open and said he'd been doing some research on properties in this zip code, and the market was actually very strong right now, surprisingly strong, and a house like this one, he'd looked at the comps, could list in the upper 280s. Possibly touching 300 with the right staging, which honestly wasn't much. Because the bones of the place were excellent, the lot size alone was above average for the neighborhood, and there were buyers looking for exactly this type of property. My mother was standing in the doorway between the dining room and the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands. She had the expression she wears when she's trying to understand something that doesn't fit the shape of what she expected. Owen leaned back in his chair. He said he'd been thinking, and he wanted to get it all out on the table, his word, table, that now that the house was free and clear, it was actually the right moment to think about Mom's financial future, because carrying a house on a part-time income even without a mortgage still meant property taxes and maintenance and utilities, and maybe it made more sense to think about something smaller, something easier to manage, and the equity could go into an account that would actually generate income for her retirement. He said he'd been worried about her. He said it with genuine feeling, which is the part that made it so hard to push back on. Brenda nodded. She said she'd looked into some really lovely independent living communities, nothing institutional, more like a nice apartment complex with activities and support if you ever need it, very reasonable monthly fees, and they'd be happy to take Mom to see a couple of them. Travis was already pulling papers from his folio. I looked at my mother. She was still standing in the doorway. The dish towel was folded very precisely in her hands. I excused myself. I said I needed to get something for my car. What I got for my car was my work bag. I carry it everywhere. My colleagues know this about me and have stopped commenting on it. It's a habit from years of cases where the document you need is the one you didn't think to bring. I had driven to Dayton knowing that something was possible, not knowing exactly what shape it would take, and I had prepared accordingly. I came back inside and set the bag on the end of the dining room table across from Travis's folio. "I want to walk through some things," I said. The first document I placed on the table was the deed. Stamped. Recorded with the Montgomery County Recorder's Office. My mother's name as sole owner. No liens, no encumbrances, no cosigners. I had a second certified copy because I always keep a second certified copy. "This is her property," I said. "Entirely. There is no mortgage, no shared interest, no estate claim that can be made against it while she's living." Owen said he knew that. He said that was kind of the whole point of the conversation. The second document was a one-page summary I had prepared the previous week, which I had not been entirely sure I would use. It laid out the 4-year payment history, not the amounts which were mine and not relevant to this conversation, but the fact of the systematic transfer, the coordination with the servicer, the legal structure of the payoff, what it established was simple. The funds that cleared this title came from one source and one source only, and that source was not a family estate, not shared savings, not any account Owen had ever contributed to. The house was free because I made it free. That created no claim on the house, but it did establish a clear record of who the interested parties actually were. Travis was quiet. He was looking at the documents the way people look at things when they're recalculating. The third thing I placed on the table wasn't a document. It was my phone, open to the Texas Real Estate Commission's lookup page. We were in Ohio, but the principal holds, showing that Travis's brokerage license in Ohio had been issued 8 months ago. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but it established that he was not the 20-year veteran of the Dayton market he had implied when he mentioned the comps. "I want to be clear about something," I said. "I'm not a lawyer and I'm not giving legal advice, but I do this professionally. I find money that people have moved in ways they didn't want found. I read the legal language that surrounds assets when people are trying to reframe who owns what. And what I can tell you is that this house, the way it's titled right now, cannot be listed, cannot be sold, cannot be used as the basis of any financial planning for anyone in this room except the woman whose name is on the deed, who has not, as far as I can tell, asked for any of this." Everyone looked at my mother. She unfolded the dish towel and set it on the counter. She walked to the table and sat down. She sat very straight the way she does when she's made a decision. "Travis," she said, "I appreciate you coming. I'm not interested in selling my home. If Owen told you otherwise, that was a misunderstanding." Travis closed his folio. He said, "Of course, no pressure, just wanted to share the information." He was out the door in 4 minutes. Owen said he was only trying to look out for her. Mom looked at him for a long moment. "I love you," she said, "but this is my house. Your sister paid for it to be my house. And I'm not leaving it until I'm ready, which I'm not, and I'll let you know when that changes." Brenda excused herself to check on the pie. Owen and I didn't speak for the rest of the afternoon. He hugged my mother before he left. He did not hug me. I wasn't expecting him to. After they left, my mother and I sat on the back porch. It was cold enough that we needed sweaters. She had the deed in her lap. She'd been carrying it from room to room for the last hour without seeming to realize she was doing it. She looked at the yard for a while. "There's a maple back there she planted when Owen was born, and it's enormous now. Genuinely too large for the space, branches reaching over both neighbors' fences. She's always said she's going to have it trimmed and never does. Can I tell you something I've never told you?" she said. "Of course," I said. "When your father left," she said, "I went to the bank to ask about refinancing the mortgage because I thought we might need to. And the man at the bank said it would be very difficult given my income situation and my credit profile as a single borrower, and he suggested I think about whether it made more sense to sell and find something more appropriate for my circumstances." She paused. "I went home, and I sat at that kitchen table for about an hour," she said, "and then I decided that I was not going to let a man in a bank tell me what was appropriate for my circumstances, and I never missed a payment. Not one." "I know," I said. She looked down at the deed. "I spent 30 years being afraid of losing it," she said. "Every time something broke, every time the property tax went up, every time I had a slow month. I was always doing the math in my head, figuring out how long I could hold on." She smoothed the edge of the document with her thumb. "I didn't know a person could just stop being afraid of something," she said. "And then I opened that envelope on my birthday and I just stopped. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. The maple tree had one branch that hung lower than the rest, almost parallel to the ground, and there was a bird sitting on it that I couldn't identify in the dark. We watched it for a while. It didn't move. 2 weeks after the Sunday dinner, Brenda posted something on her Facebook page. She didn't name me. She didn't name my mother or Owen or the situation directly. It was a long post about how painful it is when family members act unilaterally, when people use financial resources as a form of control, when generosity becomes a power play. It was written with a lot of feeling. It got a lot of supportive comments from people who knew her and didn't know the full story. A cousin of mine sent me a screenshot with a question mark. Two of my mother's church friends texted her asking if everything was okay. I typed one email. I sent it to Owen and Brenda, and I copied my firm's senior partner, who happens to specialize in civil litigation and whose name carries a specific weight in contexts like this one. The email was 3 sentences. It noted that recent public social media posts, while not naming specific individuals, contained characterizations that were materially false and potentially actionable as defamation given the demonstrable facts of record, including the documented title transfer and the timeline of events at 4/2012 Birchwood Lane. It stated that any further posts referencing the situation, directly or by clear implication, would be addressed accordingly. It asked that all future communication regarding my mother's property be directed through my professional email. The post was deleted within 6 hours. There have been no further posts. Owen sent me a text 3 weeks later. It said, "I know I handled things wrong. I was trying to do right by her." I responded, "I know, we haven't talked since. The door isn't locked. I'm not standing at it." My mother called me on a Tuesday in November, just to talk, she said, which is what she says when she has something specific she wants to tell me but needs to approach it sideways. We talked about her neighbor's new dog and the dry cleaner cutting her hours further, and whether I thought the kitchen linoleum was worth replacing or whether she should just put a rug over it. Then she said, "I've been sleeping better." I said that was good. She said, "I didn't realize how much of my sleep I was giving to that mortgage. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and it would just be there. The number, the months, the calculation." She paused. "Now when I wake up at 3, I just look at the ceiling for a minute and go back to sleep." "I'm glad," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "You know what I keep thinking about," she said. "What?" I said. "That man at the bank," she said. "All those years ago. He said think about whether this is appropriate for your circumstances." She laughed a little. "It's very appropriate," she said. "It's exactly appropriate. It's mine. There's something I've been trying to articulate for months. Something I understood in pieces, and then all at once on that back porch in October, watching a bird I couldn't name sit on a branch in the dark. I grew up watching my mother make herself smaller than she needed to be. Not out of weakness, she is one of the least weak people I know, but out of a kind of preemptive self-protection, a habit of not wanting things too visibly in case they got taken away. She held the house the way you hold something you expect someone to eventually try to take from you. She held it tightly and quietly, and at a cost I don't think she ever let herself add up. I've done the same thing in my own life in different ways. Named my limits, softly. Made my needs negotiable. Treated generosity as something I had to justify. What I know now, sitting on the other side of this, is that there is a difference between protecting what you've built and hoarding it. There is a difference between holding a boundary and building a wall. What I did for my mother's house wasn't about control. It was about making permanent what she had already earned. She earned that house with 30 years of 5 a.m. wake-ups and tight monthly math and one conversation with a banker she refused to let be the last word. I just made sure it couldn't be taken from her. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain, where I acted unilaterally, where I made financial decisions that affected the family without consultation, where I used documents as weapons in a family dinner. I've thought about that version. I think about it when I'm being honest with myself. But I also think about my mother at the kitchen table on her birthday, holding a piece of paper that said her name, sole owner, no encumbrances. I think about the way she stopped talking and just held it. I think about what she said on the back porch. I didn't know a person could just stop being afraid of something. She stopped being afraid. That's what I built. Not the paid title, not the legal structure that made Travis close his folio and walk out the door in 4 minutes. Those were tools. What I actually built was the first morning in 30 years when my mother woke up at 3 a.m. and didn't do any math. If you've ever tried to give someone something that can't be taken back, not a gift, not money, but actual security, the kind that holds, then you already know that it doesn't always look like generosity from the outside. Sometimes it looks like stubbornness. Sometimes it looks like stubbornness. Sometimes the people who would have benefited from the taking are the loudest ones, calling it a power play. You protect it anyway, because that's the only way the love actually sticks. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that Sunday in October. Not in any abstract way. I mean the specific, traceable line between what people choose to do and what eventually finds its way back to them. My mother chose, 30 years ago, not to let a banker's opinion become her ceiling. She was a single woman with 2 kids and a part-time income, and someone sat across a desk from her and suggested she consider something more appropriate for her circumstances. She went home. She sat at the kitchen table, and then she got up the next morning and kept paying. Month after month, year after year, she chose to hold on to something she'd earned, even when holding on was the harder thing to do. That's not luck. That's not fate. That's a decision made over and over again across decades, and the house on Birchwood Lane is what that decision looks like when it finishes compiling. I made my own version of that choice. I watched her carry a weight I could help lift, and instead of waiting to be asked, knowing she would never ask, I did the thing quietly and completely. That required a kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with credentials. It required paying attention. It required understanding that the person you love most is sometimes the last person who will tell you what they need. Tracing that, noticing it, and acting on it anyway, that's its own kind of wisdom. And it took me years to trust it. Owen and Brenda made choices too. I don't say that with anger. Owen genuinely believed he was doing right by my mother. He had convinced himself that what he wanted and what she needed were the same thing, and that is a very comfortable place to live until someone puts a recorded deed on the table and the two things stop overlapping. The clarity was uncomfortable for him. That discomfort was the direct result of a plan built on assumption rather than honesty, and no amount of good intention insulates a bad plan from its own consequences. What I keep coming back to is the word integrity, not in the moral lecture sense, in the structural sense. A thing has integrity when all its parts are consistent with each other, when what it says it is matches what it actually is. My mother had that. She said, "This is my house," and she meant it, and she proved it every single month for 30 years. What Owen and Brenda brought to that dining room table had no integrity. The concern for Mom's future didn't match the realtor in a polo shirt. The family conversation didn't match the folio already open before anyone sat down. Structure without integrity collapses. It always does. You don't have to force it, you just have to show up with the right documents. What I hope anyone takes from this, if there's anything to take, is that caring for the people you love is not passive. It requires attention. It requires preparation. It requires being willing to be the person in the room who opens the bag when everyone else is waiting for you to be polite and go along. Resilience isn't about surviving hard things stoically. It's about building, slowly and quietly, the kind of foundation that makes the hard thing survivable before it arrives. My mother woke up at 3 in the morning for 30 years and did math. Now she wakes up and goes back to sleep. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because she was strong enough to hold on, and because I was paying enough attention to know when it was time to hold on with her.